So welcome to everybody, and welcome to those on Catch Up. As you know, I'm in the middle of doing a series at the moment on spiritual practices. Last week we looked at silence and solitude, so I promised that as a counterbalance to that, for all you extroverts, we'd look at community today. So I don't know whether you really think of practicing community or being in community as being a spiritual practice or a spiritual discipline, as the classically will be known, but being in community has always been one of in the lists of spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices. Being in community, along with prayer and Bible studies and all the others we've looked at, has always been in the list, and it is something we need to discipline ourselves to do and to practice. As hard as it is, for us introverts like me, I sometimes have to remind myself that as far as the book is concerned, there's no such thing as lone rangers. I mean, I'd like it if there was, and I'd be there, kind of, really, if there was, but there aren't. So for us introverts, we have to remember that as well as silence and solitude and all of those things we can do personally, there's a call to do things in community, and certainly as far as being a Christian and being part of the church is a key part of that. And I think really it's just to go against that is against God's creation and the way He's made us. He's made us and designed us that we need each other. Some of us need each other more than others. That is true, because we're all different. But we all do need each other to one degree or another. And yet, community is something that we all know is broken down so much in our culture. I think it stems. I'm not a social commentator, but it stems from the Enlightenment and the rise of individualism, and the almost become rampant, really, the individualism. And we're living now in the consequences of what happened in that. And it was great that individualism was kind of wanting to go against the oppression of the masses and all the rest of it, and promotes the fact that we're all unique and individual and all the rest of it, and that's great. But we've kind of gone full circle, and it's contributing so much to the mental health issues and all the rest of it in our own world, because we just don't have community. And I think as Christians, we can't really grow into maturity without being in community. And I know for a lot of us, church is a bit love-hate, because we've all experienced, probably many of us have experienced, hurts from church, and I get that. But nevertheless, we have to discipline ourselves to do it. And it's actually true. I read recently that actually all forms of community have been in decline. We know church attendance has been in decline, and there's lots of reasons for that. But actually, all forms of community, particularly community that demands commitment, have been in decline. So clubs and all the rest of it, and so on. So it's not just the church, and it's there's arisen this individualism, and I think again, I'm not a social commentator, but I sense that what has happened from individualism, and then the sense of isolation that has got, that what's arisen in the West, certainly in the States and a lot in our country, is what we might call tribalism, where it's kind of a counterfeit culture, a community rather, but it's a way of belonging, but it's not true community. And there are different. I can just draw out some differences. Community is based around mutual love. It's based around what we value together. It's based, in its healthy way, on generosity and honouring one another. It celebrates diversity, and it's a family of love. And that's community as it's designed to be, and what the church is designed to be. Tribalism, on the other hand, is based on mutual hate. It's based on what we're against rather than what we're for. It's based on judgment and dishonour, very much. That's what we see in so much of the political debates and all the rest of it that we see now. It's about exclusion, who's out, and it's a war of tribes. Now, sadly, there are some churches that head more to tribalism than they do to community, without wanting to point the finger at anybody, and we can all get that way. But it's kind of that tribalism that we see so much of in the internet and all the rest of it, and stuff that's happening in our world, and the divisions and the unwillingness to listen to one another, or even hear somebody else's opinion. It's all about that tribalism that has arisen out of individuality, I think. Okay, so we want to be on the left. Okay, we want to be real community. So I'm going to do a couple of readings before we move on. Jesus, this is from where is this from? Mark 3. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. And these are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And then from Hebrews 10, the writer says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing." You see, it's been going on for centuries, this habit of giving up meeting. But encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. What I found really interesting, I love that in Mark's version of the calling of the disciples. He says he called the 12 as much as they to do all this, to learn from him and do the ministry stuff, but also just to be with him. And I find that a very telling phrase. So Jesus, all of these practices that we're looking at, they're things that Jesus did, and Jesus did life in community. He wasn't a lone ranger. And he called them to be with him, and it's as if it's something about when Jesus became human that he needed, as well as his relationship with his Father, he needed a relationship with fellow humanity. And he needed people to be around him and be with him. And so, if that was true for Jesus, it's also true for us. And we know that, Paul lived in community. Although he travelled around planting churches, he would always obviously be in the church when he planted it, but he also had his team that went with him. He never went on his own. He always had 2 or 3 people with him, travelling with him, going everywhere with him. He was a man who lived in community. And actually, you can chuck most of this out if you don't want to live in community, because it's all about how we live together, isn't it? I mean, there's stuff about us as individuals, but a lot of it is about how we talk to one another, how we live together, how we sort out differences and disagreements, how we love one another, and all the rest of it. So we are called to be in community, to live in community. Let me just say a couple of things about what community is not. Firstly, it's not connectivity, okay? I don't think you can have real community online. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can connect online, of course, but community is not an online Peloton group. It's not a Facebook group. It's not even a chat room. It's not an online gaming thing. I mean, all of these ways are community to a small degree, but there's nothing like community face to face with people. That's why lockdown was so hard for us, really, particularly as Christians and as church, I think, because although we did stuff online, it disrupted that beauty that is community. So, as hard as it might be, I don't think, and as wonderful as a lot of the internet and stuff is, it doesn't really give us community. It just cannot, from that arm's length way of communicating. Community also isn't just chemistry. You know what chemistry is? It's when you meet someone and you say, oh, what's your favourite band? And they say, oh, me too. What do you enjoy doing? Yeah, I like to play football. I watch football, do sport, and you think, yeah, there's a connectivity here. There's a chemistry. But that isn't really what community is. Although it's great when you have friends that see things like you do and have the same interests and so on. But it's not true community, because true community is all about a diversity as well. So don't confuse community with chemistry. Let me give you a definition. You know I like my definitions. Here's my definition. It's Jesus' school of love. That's what it is. That's what community is. It's the way we learn to love, really. You can't learn to love. Love is a giving thing. It's a community thing. You can't do that in isolation. So it's Jesus' school of love. Now let me just say, like all of these things, there are barriers to us, and with community, it's the same as any other. Individualism. I've got 3 I's that are barriers, I think, to community. Individualism obviously is a key one. It's this idea of having to commit myself to other people and commit myself to authority in a way. And it's not necessarily the authority of church leadership, but it's more the authority of a way. It's the authority of a way of life that God has designed for us, and making a commitment to that. And there are all sorts of selfish reasons why we don't want to do that. And living in community is not easy. We've got to be generous. We've got to learn to accommodate one another. I always think that living in community is like doing the 3-legged race. I'm sure they don't do it at school these days, tying kids together. But anyway, in my day they did. We used to do the 3-legged race at school sports days. And you never quite, they seem to be just chosen at random, really. You didn't get to choose your friend necessarily. So you could have all different shapes and sizes of people. And the only way that you could really stand a chance of winning the race was if you practiced a bit and just you accommodate to one another. If one stride is longer than the others, you make it shorter, so you work together. And that's what being in community is. We learn to make accommodations to one another. We learn to adjust ourselves. Same as learning to dance, I suppose. Not that I can dance, but you accommodate to one another. You match the stride pattern. And as individuals, that's hard to do. We don't want to necessarily adjust ourselves to somebody else in order to make the community work. So individualism obviously is a barrier to us, and that we are in a hugely individualistic culture in the West. I do sense that actually people are beginning to realise it's not worked, but nevertheless we're still there at the moment, and it's hard for us who've grown up in that to adjust to it. One of the barriers sometimes is idealism. Sometimes we can just have unrealistic expectations about community and church particularly. It's going to be easy, it's going to be great, it's going to be perfect. It isn't. You'll never find the perfect church, as they say. But we come into community with the thought that things will be done my way. I'll be the one that's listened to, or that you'll worship my way, or if you don't, then I'm off. And then isn't that often the way in whatever context you want to put it in church? If it's not done my way, then I'm out. We just have this idealism that everybody's going to agree with me, or it's all going to be easy. So we should have high vision for the church, but we shouldn't have unrealistic expectations. And then it's just intimidation of fear, past experiences, ways we've been hurt. Being in community, being in church is a vulnerable thing to do. And often for us, going there is a hard thing to do. And I know that for many of you that's been the case, and I understand it. But I think community is almost the other flip side of silence and solitude. I think of all of the spiritual practices, those are the two that we probably feel most intimidated by, because in each of them, it's kind of that our soul gets laid bare. In true community it does, because we make mistakes and people find out about who we really are, and that takes a good deal of vulnerability and accountability, and we're afraid of that very often. I know I can be sometimes, I'm afraid of being vulnerable, of opening up as to who I really am, and being accountable. But we need to get over, and obviously as a church we aim to create as safe a place as possible to do that. So those are three barriers: individualism, idealism, intimidation. And as we spend the rest of the time, I'm going to try and give you some incentives. Benefits to community. This is what you want to hear, isn't it? Okay. Firstly, just encouragement and help. We've all, although we've all had hurts, I guess, in church, we've also known, I hope, that blessing of just somebody coming alongside us in our difficulties, in our troubles, encouraging us, doing, as it said in that Hebrews thing, spurring us on, keeping us going when we want to give up. Because we all want to give up with the Christian. Well, I do anyway. I don't know about you, but sometimes I just want to give up on Jesus and say, I've had enough. I'm off. But I need others around me who will encourage me in those moments when things are tough, when things are difficult, and we just encourage one another. We help one another, and that's when community is working at its best. Is what happens. We spur one another on to do more, to good deeds, and so on. We also just learn to persevere in relationships and persevere in the mess. A lot of people don't want to, as soon as the going gets tough, we want to bail out. Now, I'm not talking here about where relationships become really toxic. That there is a level of toxicity it can be even in church life when it's safer to get out, as it is in other relationships as well. But nevertheless, we all come across times when we find one another difficult, when something rubs us up the wrong way, when a relationship gets a bit tough, and we have to, and it's learning to actually persevere and work that out, and we can only do that in community. So I want to encourage you, in those times when you feel, this is just getting too hard. Persevere, keep going, because actually what it does is something in us. That's what, you know that the project is always you, don't you? That's how it is. One of my pastors said recently when we were talking about church planting, he said, the project's you. And it is, because we change and we find through all the hardships and difficulties, we learn to be better through the Spirit's help. So also moving from independence and self-absorption to others-centeredness. That's what we do in community. We learn to listen, and we learn to appreciate others, and we learn not to be self-obsessed and self-centered, and learn to give way, and all sorts of beautiful things that Jesus does. So we should do them as well. We achieve more together. That's just a simple truth. We're very limited as to what we can do outside of community as a Christian. And we can do stuff, but we're always going to be limited. And we achieve more together when we bring all that we are into this unique thing called the church. And allied to that, we bring our unique gifting and personality into a body. Helen and I can't build this church, do church. We need you. We need what you are, who you are, in all of your quirkiness and beauty and individuality. You bring something that we don't have. So we need you. We need you. And that's true. And I think there's something about bringing that unique gifting into an accountable body that works together. Sometimes we have to change the way we do things just to fit in with the body, to make it work together, and so on. Got a few more of these, we can go through them quickly. Just receiving insights that we're blind to. As hard as that is, we all have our blind spots, and we don't see sometimes our shadow selves, you know, all the things that we still need healing from, but others often do see it, and in the right way and in the loving atmosphere, hopefully some people can come and say, look, do you realise this, or, you know, perhaps you need to work on that a bit, or do you realise what you said was, and we need each other to help us do that, to help us grow. Always in love, you know. But we do get insights from other people. Growing in the fruits of the Spirit, that's a clear one that can only happen in community. You know, particularly I always think patience. You know, how do you learn patience? When you do it in a church, don't you really? Practicing the biblical one another's. You know that there are 59 in the letters, 59 of these one another's. Do this for one another, and respect one another, forgive one another, and all the rest of it. You can only do those in community. And I love this, revealing the power of Christ to reconcile and break barriers. I think this is something that I think is very special, because the powers and authorities that are around us don't believe that we can live in community. There's a verse in Ephesians 3, verse 10, I think it is, where it talks about the church being the multifaceted. I can't remember it. Let me read it. Because I shall get it wrong if I don't. So it says, his intent was, this is God, that now through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. That manifold wisdom actually means multicoloured, and I think it's talking about all of the diversity of humanity. And the fact that the powers and authorities, you know, when Paul talks about that, he's talking about spiritual powers, he's talking about demons particularly, I think. And he's saying that the church reveals to the demons that actually through Christ, you can have a community that works together. You know, they think that what the powers and authorities are trying to do and think they can successfully do is divide humanity up and put one another against one another and so on. But the church is the one place where potentially that breaks down and comes back through the healing of Christ. And sometimes when I'm tempted to give up on church, I think, no, I'm not going to let the demons win. You know, I'm going to prove them wrong, because I believe that we can, through the love of Christ, present to the powers and authorities and to the world something which is radically different and beautiful. And that is the coming together of people of different personalities, different backgrounds, different ethnicity and all the rest of it, and living and working and being beautiful together. So that's just something that I love from that. Serving, not being served, but coming and learning to serve. I think this is also important in community. We just see how others do stuff. It's that whole thing of mentoring and seeing, you know, we learn to pray largely a lot by listening to others pray and thinking, oh, that's how they do it. Or we learn to heal through watching somebody else do healing, or whatever ministry it might be. We learn and grow by being with others, watching how others do the stuff. Growing in openness and vulnerability, talked about that. Learning to defer and prefer. I think that's a very key thing. Not many of us really like to defer to others or prefer others, but that's what we're called to do in the church. I've got a couple of verses here. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. That's Philippians 2:4. And be devoted to one another in love, honour one another above yourselves. That's all about that deferring and preferring. And we become just gradually in community should become more like Christ. We become more caring and more peaceful and more patient and so on through the practice of being in community. So there's loads of reasons for being in community. I'm sure there's more than I've listed there, but I just want to say that we need to, again, commit ourselves to being in community, to doing this stuff together and being a witness to the world together. You know, I'm always reminded that Jesus said, you'll know my people because they love one another. That's the distinctive thing that they have. You'll know my people because they love one another. That's who we want to be. That's who I want to be better at. I want to be better at loving and serving, being more patient, being kinder, and we do that together as we grow together. I think I'm done.